The Backrooms movie just came out, and I want to give you guys my thoughts, review, and talk about some of the lore in the movie. Today, I am Icy, bringing you the Backrooms breakdown. So, we open the movie with, honestly, a recreation of the original video with a man walking around, trying to figure out where he is. He's lost, and he's trying to get out of there. Honestly, I don't think it's a great opening. I think it could be slightly stronger. But I appreciate the homage. I think Kane was just like, I have a bigger budget. I just want to recreate what I had already made. So then we continue into a man named Clark who owns a furniture store. And he's meeting with his psychiatrist. And her name is Mary. So basically we follow Mary as she's working with Clark to go through his emotional devastation because he's been divorced from his wife. And we don't completely understand why yet. But as the session goes on between them, we discover that it does seem that Clark was probably on the wrong side of this altercation. He's seemingly entitled and never really blames himself for anything. He seems like, oh, I don't have any help, and you're not doing anything to benefit me. It's a very transactional relationship he sees with his wife. We eventually see that, honestly, his furniture store isn't doing very well, and he sometimes dresses up as a pirate in the commercials to bring in sales. And eventually, he discovers the Backrooms in his basement. He eventually starts exploring it, and he tells Mary about it, but she doesn't really want to get too involved. We also start discovering some of Mary's backstory, and basically, her mother was mentally insane, and that kind of created her fascination with understanding psychology and trying to help people. And in a lot of ways, Mary and Clark are very much the same. Clark wants to understand the Backrooms, and once he does, he wants to stay there, just as she wants to stay in her path. They both have very similar character arcs in some certain respect, but I think there's a better parallel for Clark, which is the Backrooms itself. Both are two things that are meant to be explored. Clark is meant to be explored by Mary. She's meant to explore his psychology, who he is, why he is, all these different types of things. In the Backrooms, we see that with Async, and we see these two parallel relationships working throughout the movie. Eventually, Mary is kidnapped by Clark as she enters the Backrooms because Clark hasn't really been seen for quite a long while. And so when she wakes up, she's in a chair. And she's like, where the heck am I? Clark, obviously just nuts at this point, basically tells her that he really enjoys this place and like pulls stuffing out of a guy's stomach. Now, I can explain this really quickly. It's basically called a still life, and basically still life are replicas of what real people are. So if I, for instance, saw my father and then I entered the Backrooms would try to recreate my father, but it wouldn't be perfect. We discover that the Backrooms is actually alive and is recreating these memories from the people that enter it. And we see that part of these memories include a manifestation of Clark. It's a giant pirate monster that appears. And this monster appears right as Clark is freeing Mary. And during this section, basically Clark has accepted that it is somewhat his fault. And he's finally come to terms with that, in some respect. And the monster attacks him, and the monster, representing his insecurities and some of his trauma, attacks him in a fit of rage because it doesn't want to accept that it is somewhat Clark's fault. So it sees Clark as kind of an antagonist now. And so it chases Mary and eventually leads back into the original store, where the monster is de-legged, knocks out the peg leg, and the monster falls down. Async is also around, and they talk to Mary. They save her, and we get this incredible scene. I think it's probably one of the best endings for the movie. Basically, she's like, what is going to happen to me? And it seems like she, in some ways, comes to terms with what her destiny is going to be, just as we saw Clark come to terms with his own faults and his own shortcomings towards the end of the film. And I would say Mary comes to somewhat of the same conclusion, but in a different way for her own arc. And we get this final wonderful shot where we see the replica of Mary in the Backrooms. Distorted face, just sitting there. And it's perfect. His biggest strength in this movie is the blocking and the mise-en-scène, which is within the film. You can just really tell how intentional it is, and I'm really impressed. There's a lot of movies that I've seen that don't do really good blocking. But this is a movie that seems to be based on the fundamentals of film and Kane understands them very well. I thought the writing could have been a little bit on the nose at times, but I felt like in some ways that's what Kane was going for, because he wanted to get across the concept of the Backrooms to the people watching. So I do understand how some of the character writing could come across as a little in your face. Another thing that I need to add is that Kane Parsons understands how to use the duration of the image to his advantage. And you can see that throughout the shots. Some people complain that the shots are too long, but listen, you have to have an attention span. Shots can go on for a while, and the filmmaker's choice of how long the shot goes on is up to them. And that's the reason we have movies. The duration of the shot is basically the entire point of a movie. Whereas an image, you can look at a picture for a second, or you can look at a picture for 10 minutes. So the duration of the image is something that Kane Parsons understands well, and I think it built up the tension within the movie accurately. I thought the world building was incredible. You were able to understand it and comprehend it in a simple way, but then also an endless concept that can be utilized multiple times. Now, some of the negatives I have for it, and I don't want to say that these completely take away from the film, but they do ruin pacing where it could have been slightly tighter. And I think every time I saw one of those sections, my mind instantly went to, oh yeah, there's an overarching plot here. And that kind of shows like, oh, Kane is setting up for a sequel. And I understand why. Like, if I was in a situation, like, yeah, we're getting that sequel, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, we get a couple cutaways to async scientists, and these scientist scenes just ruin the flow of the movie for me. I think it works at the end of the film, but in all honesty, I don't think you needed any other part of the film. I think async could have just showed up at the end, and nobody really would have cared, because you've kind of already introduced async at the beginning, you've introduced them at the end, and you had the tapes that Clark discovered earlier in the movie. Because honestly, I really enjoyed the personal journeys that Mary and Clark were going through. Some of the cinematography for Mary, I think, is the best that we've seen. The claw shot at the beginning, when you get the introduction to her character, is extremely well done. And it gets the point across so well, so quickly. I applaud Kane. I think he knew exactly what he wanted to do. It's obviously storyboarded extremely well, especially for a very young director. He has a clear vision in mind for what he wanted to see. I think Kane Parsons is a better director than falling into the trope of the victim spraining their ankle in the final chase. Because Mary is running away from the giant pirate Clark, right? The evil pirate Clark. And she sprains her ankle going over a bunch of sofas. And listen, I get maybe you could sprain your ankle, but at the end of the day, we all know this as a horror trope. And I kind of am sad to say that I just hate to see Kane Parsons fall into this horror trope that I think's been overused and really stupid overall. Like, listen, I understand I can sprain my ankle at times, but there's no way that she just sprains it there, especially for how dramatic of a chase scene this is. I just think you could be like, oh, the monster's quick. Like, there's no reason you have to have her sprain her ankle in that moment. I do think that some of the heavy-handedness in the film does come from when Mary hits the evil Clark monster with a handprint that she's been holding on to forever. That is like a very cliche thing. I think it would have been really interesting to see her discover this handprint while she was walking through the back rooms, as if this was something that she picked up in there and then she used that against the monster rather than her just like taking it in. But that's a small critique. The next thing I want to get to is like the lore. And so basically what I would say is, I've had this discussion before, and the monster represents the insecurities of Clark, his failures. He wanted to be an architect, but he never succeeded. He's working in a furniture store, and he basically just hates himself and blames everybody else for his failure. And so when he accepts that he's part of those failures, that he is part of the reason that he fails, the monster attacks him because the monster is all those insecurities. And so when the monster recognizes that it's Clark's fault too, then the monster kills Clark. And that's why the monster is killing people. The monster views everything as everybody else's fault, and it's never its own fault, which is a really great creative thing to have in the Backrooms. And some people are trying to fit this into the Backrooms lore, and I can definitely see how this fits into the Backrooms lore. It's 1990, not till like 1996 that we see the original Backrooms video, but I have to be honest, guys, I would much rather this be the Backrooms lore and it not even have to fit into the videos. because this does a far better and superior job of explaining to the audience what is going on within this world. And the idea of like still lifes where people are created from memory. One thing that I really liked was during the dinner table scene, he scalps his ex-wife and puts the hair on Mary. And once he's about to release Mary and the evil pirate Clark shows up, we see his ex-wife run into the corner and start screaming, insinuating that there's like an instinct into these still lifes, where even if they are still, they still have instinctual things that they do from their previous life. So she runs away and hides because Clark beat his wife, which is an extremely dark, small detail that I absolutely love that Kane put in there. I have to say though, as a 20-year-old cinema student, this is extremely motivating. I know I can take this as an extremely demotivated way because I'm not that successful. I am not Kane Parsons by any stretch of the imagination. However, I think it's extremely motivating to know that there's a lot more work that I need to do to be that successful. And taking some of the steps that Kane has done will get me there. I'm not going to be a Kane Parsons. I know that for certain. But if I want to get to where he's at, I need to take those steps and continue to be as creative as I possibly can to put out the best films I can. Anyways, guys, I hope you all have an amazing day. ICY ICY out.